Let's stay on this story and bring in Marc Lee. He is a senior economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Marc, nice to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Hello, Andrew.
So today's Premier's meeting is expected to see the signing of more of these memorandums of understanding between provinces. There have been, Ontario has signed a number with some provinces to eliminate these interprovincial trade barriers. Would this actually make a difference to the Canadian economy?
Well, in short, no. The reason is that goods, services, and investments already flow freely across Canada. That was something that was built into the Canadian Constitution in 1867. In the context of international trade agreements, it's been reaffirmed with interprovincial trade deals in 1995 called the Agreement on Internal Trade, and in 2017, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. So the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, if you read the language of it, it does what the premiers say they're promising to do right now. So I think a lot of this is just political theater. Obviously, the premiers and the Prime Minister are looking to respond to the Trump tariff threats, but they should be focusing more on those big macro international trade policies, some of the stuff that was just discussed in terms of retaliatory tariffs or other measures that we could be taking. There's very, very little to be gained from this conversation on internal trade barriers, but it makes the provinces look good. They can wrap themselves in the flag and say that they're responding to the Trump tariff threats.
Well, Marc, it's interesting you say this, and maybe it is political theater, but, when you listen to the Prime Minister and others, but the Prime Minister has said that if these interprovincial trade barriers are removed and there is more free trade within the country, that it could grow the Canadian economy by $250 billion. So you say that's bogus?
Yeah, I've had conversations with the author of that study. It's mostly Trevor Toome coming from the University of Calgary. It's it's an economic modeling exercise that assumes that there are large trade barriers that exist largely due to differences in regulation between provinces. So differences in environmental protection or consumer protection, health and safety for workers. Trevor himself would admit that to the extent you can resolve these, you may not be able to capture all of that. It's a long-term gain. We're looking at gains that would happen 10, 20 years down the road, and even that $200 billion is the top end of a very large range. So I think there's not a whole lot to be gained here. The media keeps trotting out this idea that there are large interprovincial trade barriers and keeps throwing out that $200 billion number. It's not helpful to the public debate. It's a distraction relative to the big things. We should be focusing more on things like federal public service cuts that are coming. That's going to have a massive macroeconomic impact across the country that will completely dwarf any potential gains from these trade barriers.
Interesting. Okay, so you think we should focus on that? Is there anything else you think that the premiers and, they're meeting with the Prime Minister. They meet every year, but this is special because of the particular circumstances we find ourselves in because of Donald Trump's trade war on us tomorrow. What should those discussions be focused around?
Well, I think they should be looking at, to what extent does Canada retaliate, but also, what are areas where we can react without necessarily hurting ourselves. If you bring up retaliatory tariffs, you increase the cost for Canadian consumers and businesses. But for example, here where I am in British Columbia, we also ship a lot of coal from the United States through the port of Vancouver, and this would be one where it doesn't actually affect our Canadian economy very much at all, but we could take steps to put tariffs on that or limit the ability to transship through British Columbia. So I think there are other things we should be talking about that could have a real impact on the discussions. But ultimately, this comes down to what are Canadians willing to concede in order to get a deal with the United States. That could be supply management. It could be softwood lumber here in BC. It could be measures to do with steel or aluminum or the auto sector. But those are like the key areas where we're concerned. And if we do get a deal with Donald Trump, how good is that deal worth? How long will it last before the next hissy fit translates into some other barriers? So that the credibility of any deal with the United States is important. But I understand that Canadian business wants to get back to as close to business as usual as possible. I just think the world has changed challenged. And, we'll see where Prime Minister Carney is able to get us in terms of those negotiations. But it's a very difficult situation.
Okay, another area that the Prime Minister has said would help grow the Canadian economy is Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act. That would fast-track some projects of national interest. There's been some controversy around it, but what do you make of that?
I think it is a concern if we're trying to ram through projects overriding Indigenous concerns and consultations and the idea of free, prior, and informed consent. It's problematic to the extent that there are major environmental impacts associated with these projects or potential other areas where federal regulation is needed in terms of like worker health and safety or things like that. I think we should be thinking about big infrastructure projects east-west. I'm a little concerned that too much of this revolves around pipelines and the oil and gas industry, the industries of the 20th century, when we need to be looking forward to the 21st century and thinking about things like an east-west clean electricity grid or high-speed rail, projects that really link us together as Canadians. And that will actually, frankly, do a lot more for interprovincial trade than this bogus conversation on trade barriers.
Marc, thank you. Marc Lee is a senior economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives.